Well, good morning, Northlake. So good to see you this morning, Thursday, and today's a special day. I got my dad with me here, and my dad and I are heading out on a road trip together with my son this week, and we're going to kind of celebrate my father, 54 years of full-time ministry as a pastor, and he's passing the baton of a church that he started a handful of years ago to another young pastor. And my dad will tell you he's never going to retire. He doesn't believe in retirement, but it's going to look different here for this next season of his life. And so this morning in Galatians chapter 1 in verse 10, we covered 6 through 10 yesterday, but verse 10, this is what Paul says. He says, For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. So Paul is actually hitting on something that I think everybody struggles with. That is approval. That many times we live our life seeking the approval of peers, co-workers, family, friends. But yet here Paul is saying that the only person I seek approval from is God himself. And then he goes on to say, though, the reason why, he gives us the answer. He said, because he's a servant of Christ. And our translators don't give justice to this word, servant of Christ. It should actually be considered a slave of Jesus, meaning that he considered his life not his own, but his life belonged to Jesus. And so he had this a unique insight and perspective of life that it is I give everything for the approval of God, not of man. And we all struggle with this. And I thought it'd be interesting because my dad, who has been in ministry for 54 years and has dealt with thousands upon thousands of people in and out of his churches, and has probably seen so many people chase after a dream or a lifestyle that they think is going to give them satisfaction or even give them approval in the eyes of others, and to see it just kind of all, doesn't amount to anything. And so I thought, since I got him here, the man of wisdom, Dad, I thought maybe you could share with us for a minute or two what does it take, not just in ministry but in life, married to the same woman for 55 years, and to be faithful in ministry for 54 with the perspective of I'm here to please the Lord in my life. What does it take for our church family as parents, grandparents, our young students? What does it take to live? I mean, what are some of the things that's like, this is the secret? Not that there's a secret, but, is there something you would share?
Sure. And I share it not academically, but probably experientially. And that is, I, like everybody else, battle with this whole idea of people's approval. In the ministry, it is some pastors that have it ruled their lives over approval. I got to be approved by the board or the people. So the word approval stands out. The word servant, which is slave, as you point out, that's a word that's important. But I think it comes down to the realization that every one of us as broken people want to be approved. The problem is it starts way back in childhood, in dysfunctional families when you're not approved by a parent, especially your father. Then sometimes that just throws the whole track off. And it comes out, probably why I feel pain, and that is for junior high kids when they're trying to get their self-identity. They're looking at all the other kids around them like, oh, I got to be like her, I got to have that. Then it goes into you're 40, and you're still looking around, at 40 years old. I want to, trying to find out who I am. You measure it by everything around us. We do it in the church, we do it everywhere. And so I think it roots, I know for me, I chased that for about 28 years in ministry, just trying to establish who I was. And I could camouflage it because it was God's work. But underneath, it was really Dennis trying to figure out who he was, having to be the best pastor, build the biggest church, to the point that it almost ruined, everything from our marriage to my own self. And I finally woke up to my identity is in Christ. And when you can recognize that there's no other place but in Jesus, that I can be complete. And then realize the relationship is not only your Lord, your God, but you are his servant. And that means he owns me. Paul says that we're not our own, we've been bought with a price. And so he does own me. But it's a loving relationship that, like as the bondservant would come back and say, I love my master, and I love my family, and I commit to him. It's that identity in Christ, number one, and then living with eternal perspective, that everything else is going to perish. You know, Paul says that the only thing that's going to last is not the things we see, the things we don't see. And you know, Paul's last letter that he wrote was to Timothy. And he writes to him in chapter 2, and he says, do your best, Timothy, to be an approved workman.
That's right.
And Timothy, your whole goal in life is to be approved to God, and many of us don't live for that. So I had to determine halfway through my ministry, who am I trying to be approved of? And when I finally surrendered to my identity in Christ, I finally surrendered to the fact that I want to live with the eternal view, not temporal view, because everything around me is going to blow up. There was a major change, and so the next 26 years I could actually live freedom to minister, but yet not minister for man's approval. So it comes down to that. Who's your owner? And is that owner a kind and loving owner? Yes. And is that God good? Yes. And we're going to live for him, so that someday we stand before him as an approved workman. And Paul had that very definitely. I mean, you look at his life, all the stuff he went through. If he hadn't had that, he wouldn't have gone through it. So I think just that identity in Christ, that realization of eternal perspective, and that I am approved, and by him when I got saved, and now I'm going to live underneath that approval, so that he is pleased with me. And I just, this is a battle we have to fight, because everything around us is totally a different message than God's approval.
So, church, think of this for a second. Think about this idea that you only have one life. You only have one life to live in faith. That's it. You don't get to live in faith in eternity. You only have it today. And when we walk in faith with Christ, we are trusting him with all these other things that we get wrapped up around. Our careers, our money, our finances, the accolades of men. We put all that aside. We lean into the loving relationship that Jesus has, that he's marked us as a child of God. And in that, we move forward as saying, I'm not my own. I'm serving him. It's his approval. And we walk in faith. And you only got one shot at it. One shot. And so today, think about those things. Just as Paul said, am I approving man? No, I'm not. If I was, I wouldn't be a servant of Christ. But we are redeemed people of Jesus, and we are the servants of Christ. So let's live for him. We are going to go have fun. And we're still going to do some heart talks along the road. It could be a great week. Who knows where you're going to find us. But Dad and I, we're going to go have a blast. I love you, church. We miss you. Take care of yourself.